Today's Psukim introduce us to the character of Memuchan, the advisor of Achashverosh, who gives the fateful advice to demote Vashti from her position as queen. Our sages try to identify Memuchan with some other known character from elsewhere in the universe of Tanakh. Perhaps the most famous attempt is that we find in the Gemara in Megillah, which identifies Memuchan with Haman. And according to that understanding, the first appearance of Haman really in the Megillah is here under the guise of Memuchan, whereas one of Achashverosh's advisors, he tries to eliminate Vashti from her position of authority. Alternatively, the Medrash in the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer identifies Memuchan with the Jewish sage Daniel, the hero of the book bearing that name. Daniel, we know, was an advisor in the royal court in Babylonia, and then, as the book of Daniel itself describes, when Babylonia falls to the Persian Empire, that Daniel maintains his position as a sage advisor, only now in the hierarchy of the Persian court. And according to this understanding, here under the name Memuchan continues to play the role that he had played in previous administrations. Perhaps one could suggest that these two opinions reflect two basic ways of understanding the role of the first chapter of the Megillah, which again, honestly speaking, really has nothing to do with the story of Esther's rise to greatness directly, or the plot against the Jews. According to those opinions that Memuchan was Haman, the first chapter of the Megillah really shows us that Haman's machinations of power begin much earlier, and that ironically within the trap that Haman set for himself by clearing the way for Esther to become queen, we already see the hand of God's providence in the weaving of the Purim story, which again is one of the basic messages in Jewish thought of the entire Megillah. According to the opinion, though, that Memuchan was Daniel, we would have to understand the story somewhat differently. According to that opinion, this perhaps focuses on the fact that Vashti, according to our tradition, was the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian emperor who destroys the Beis HaMikdash. If that is the case, the message of the first chapter is that Nebuchadnezzar's house eventually finds the punishment that they deserve for the suffering that they inflicted on the Jewish people. The message then, consistent with the rest of the Megillah, is that God is protective of the Jewish people even in the time of exile. And again, this certainly was one of the great crises that faced our ancestors during the first exile. Has God abandoned us during this period where we are clearly away from our land with no temple, with no indigenous leadership? Right? Have we been completely abandoned by God? And of course, the message of the whole story of the Megillah is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu continues to be with us, perhaps in secret ways, but that providential protection is always with the Jewish people. If we are to understand that Memuchan, the advisor who brings down Queen Vashti, is actually Daniel, the Jewish leader who led the Jews during the dark days of the Babylonian exile, I would suggest that this Midrashic opinion is telling us that what the story of the Megillah is about fundamentally is the idea that God will deal with every nation which persecutes the Jewish people. Eventually a time of judgment will come to them. And what better hand for the judgment of Babylonia to finally be meted out than through Daniel, a young man kidnapped as a youth, brought to live in the Babylonian court, where with great mesiras nefesh, with great sacrifice, maintains his practice of Judaism even within that foreign court. A tremendous poetic justice in bringing that whole story to a completion. So again, two perspectives on the Megillah. One perspective that Memuchan as Haman is already setting what is ironically his own trap in the first chapter by his dismissal of Vashti. The second, that Memuchan is Daniel, reflecting the idea that this is a book about God's providence protecting us, whatever will come to the Jewish people.